In a high-stakes chess game of global politics, Russia's bold threats of nuclear intervention in Ukraine have sent shivers down the spine of the international community. With Vladimir Putin's regime not shying away from the nuclear option, the West has been walking a tightrope, careful not to push the bear into a corner. But as the specter of nuclear war looms over nightly news, casting a pall of fear, something unexpected is happening. Setbacks on the Ukrainian front and political gambits in the US are twisting the narrative, possibly reshaping alliances and commitments. With Europe possibly doubling down on support for Ukraine and America's political future hanging in the balance, could we see a dramatic shift in the conflict's dynamics? Imagine a scenario where enhanced Western backing arms Ukraine not just with moral support, but with the military might to truly challenge Russian advances. What would the US's next move be if the nuclear saber no longer kept its enemies at bay? As we dive into this tangled web of warfare, politics, and nuclear brinkmanship, one thing's for sure: the outcome could redefine the course of history. For a month as of the writing of this script, Ukraine has launched nearly daily long-range drone attacks against Russian oil infrastructure, with a particular focus on Russia's refineries. This leaves Russia in an incredibly vulnerable position because the nation has historically relied on Western technology and expertise for its refining infrastructure, and after the Western pullout of Russia, the nation has largely been forced to sell unrefined oil, which sells for a fraction of the price of more lucrative refined products. India, for instance, buys unrefined Russian oil and then refines it in its own facilities to sell for a significant profit on the international market, while Russia receives none of these additional profits. By now, Ukraine is threatening to choke off Russia's ability to export oil, significantly impacting its capability to fund its current war. With painful military and economic defeats, could Vladimir Putin resort to the nuclear option, and how would the US respond? We know two things for certain about Russian use of nuclear weapons. The first is that China, Russia's only significant partner, has warned Russia against the use of nuclear weapons. Annoyed by the negative press surrounding Putin's constant threat of using nukes, China has warned Russia to knock the saber rattling off. Ever since then, Putin has been obedient to the Chinese demand, mostly relegating the bulk of nuclear threats to his subordinates and Russian state media. Any move to use nuclear weapons on the Ukrainian battlefield would require Russia to carefully calculate what it might gain militarily versus what it'll lose, with an inevitable collapse of Chinese support. At the moment, Russia is heavily dependent on China as an export partner to help finance its war, and on Chinese imports of smuggled microchips and direct military aid, such as uniforms and military vehicles. The second known in the Russian nuclear question is the American response. President Biden, through the Department of Defense and State Department diplomats, warned Vladimir Putin what the repercussions would be if he used a nuclear weapon inside of Ukraine. The first tier of consequences for a singular nuclear attack would be the complete destruction of the responsible unit. This would mean an American military strike against the unit from which the attack originated. Russia has three options for launching a nuclear weapon against Ukraine: mobile launcher, air, and sea. But before we get into each of those in more detail, if you've ever scrolled through your social media feeds and felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of news, unsure of what to trust, you're not alone. Today's media landscape is flooded with information that can be difficult to verify, often lacking context about the sources. Moreover, algorithms and financial incentives prioritize engagement over informed discussion, trapping us in filter bubbles. This is where ground news comes in. Developed by a former NASA engineer, Ground News gathers articles from over 50,000 sources worldwide, so you can compare how different outlets report on the same story. And Ground News doesn't just compile articles, it provides crucial context about the sources, including their political biases, reliability, and ownership, all assessed by 3 independent news monitoring organizations. Let's take a look at this story recently about the Republican Party warning of a national threat of Russia wanting nuclear war in space. We can see it's been covered by over 230 sources, with it having more right-leaning sources covering it. We can compare the headlines based on political leaning, along with being able to see the factuality, the ownership breakdown, and also when and where this story was published. What we love most about Ground News is its ability to provide a truly panoramic view of global news. So we get diverse viewpoints, see discrepancies in news coverage, and practice critical thinking, which means that we in turn can share better information with others. Now, if you're ready to transform how you consume news, go to ground.news/military show to give it a try. If you sign up through the link below, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what we use to get unlimited access to all features. We think ground news is incredibly important, and we recommend that you check them out. Again, link in the description below. Now, back to what we were saying. Russia has 3 options for launching a nuclear weapon against Ukraine: mobile launcher, air, and sea. It's doubtful the US will be able to locate mobile launchers and destroy them in retaliation, nor would that send an effective response. Thus, it's unknown what exactly the US would retaliate against. The second and third options, however, are more likely to be used and easier to respond against. Russia's ever-dwindling Black Sea fleet still has the capacity of launching nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, and an air attack would likely come from an Su-34 strike fighter. In the case of a sea launch, the offending ship would be targeted, and it's possible other Black Sea Fleet ships with the ability to launch nuclear weapons would also be destroyed in retaliation. In case of an airstrike, the home airfield of the launched aircraft would likely bear the brunt of a US strike. The second tier of consequences threatened by America involves the wide-scale destruction of Russian forces inside of Ukraine itself. This is unlikely to include the use of American ground forces, but rather Russian forces would be subjected to an American air and missile campaign, similar to the 3 weeks that preempted Desert Storm. This would leave Russian forces in disarray, and Ukraine would be able to exploit air superiority established by the US Air Force to great advantage. How either option would further escalate or even de-escalate the conflict remains unknown. But just to show that he wasn't bluffing, President Biden ordered additional B-52 bombers into the European theater on long-term rotation. So how would a nuclear attack be carried out, and the ensuing American response? Russia would be unlikely to resort to the use of strategic nuclear weapons against a Ukrainian city, as this would come with far too great a political cost for the nation to bear. It's likely such an attack would collapse even vociferous domestic support, and unlikely Putin's commanders all along the nuclear chain of command would even agree to launch it in the first place. A far more probable scenario is that Putin would order the use of tactical nuclear weapons, though probably not for a direct battlefield effect. With the front line so widely spread and the presence of so much military on both sides, troop concentrations are surprisingly light, except in areas of major operations, such as previous battles in Bakhmut and Avdiivka. To have a real battlefield effect, tactical weapons would need to be employed en masse, with up to 100 strikes just to achieve a significant effect against Ukrainian defenders. Such a massive attack is politically untenable for Russia, so therefore it would probably resort to the use of 1 or 2 tactical nuclear weapons as a show of force and warning against further support for Ukraine. The goal would be to terrify Western populations and their politicians with the very real prospect of a nuclear war, despite the possibility of such a war being even less likely after the inevitable global backlash against Russia in the wake of even a single nuclear strike. Yet it's undeniable the effect that images of nuclear detonations in Ukraine across Western media would have, especially at a time when many in the West are already questioning further support for Ukraine. An attack may not even directly target Ukrainian forces, but rather somewhere close to them. Such an attack was already a chief concern by the US Department of Defense, who warned that a desperate Putin could resort to detonating a nuclear weapon over the Black Sea as the ultimate scare tactic. Whether the attack produces casualties or not, though, a US response is assured. It's likely that such an attack would be carried out by aircraft or ships. The Kinzhal air-launched cruise missile is capable of being carried by Russian strike aircraft, while the Kalibr cruise missile has the capability to carry a nuclear warhead and can be launched by some of the surviving ships in the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Given how capable Ukraine's air defenses have become in the last year, such an attack would be part of a swarm of other conventional weapons, with a nuclear component launched against a target near the front lines where air defense coverage is less robust and interception less likely. Nothing would be more embarrassing for Russia than to launch an attack and have it foiled by air defenses. Russia could play it safe and perform its demonstrative blast in the Black Sea, but that would require carefully coordinating with the presence of third-party ships and aircraft over the sea. It would also limit the number of eyes on target, so to speak, and leave behind little physical evidence to be photographed and filmed and spread across global media. The entire point, after all, is for the strike to be very visible, as well as its consequences. Thus, a strike somewhere along the front is far more likely and safer an option. Carrying out such an attack would come with plenty of warning. Only a portion of Russia's nuclear storage depots carry actual tactical weapons, and the one most likely to be used in this attack would be the depot near Belgorod, known as Belgorod 22. Russian nuclear storage sites have large garages and other structures to hide activity from snooping satellites. So while US and European surveillance would be unable to see nukes being directly loaded onto a transport truck, or how many, the signs of a pending nuclear attack would be impossible to miss. This operation would require the use of not just a transport truck, but accompanying security forces to safely deliver the weapon or weapons to a nearby airfield or port. Russia could be incredibly reckless and opt to use no obvious security presence, but given the presence of constant cross-border attacks by Russian militias and the presence of many Ukrainian infiltration and sabotage agents in the country, this is a risk that's not worth the reward. The weapons would then have a lengthy journey to a military airfield or port for loading either onto nuclear-capable strike aircraft or a Russian ship. The nearest airfield to Belgorod 22 would be Kursk base, over 100 miles away. All the time, satellite surveillance and both Ukrainian and Western agents on the ground would have plenty of time to pick up clues that the weapons were on the move. Increased security activity at the receiving airbase or port would be a dead giveaway that a nuclear attack was imminent. This would give the United States time to prepare its response. The US already has significant assets in the region, with the presence of bomber aircraft both in Germany and Britain, as well as fighter aircraft in bases within a short flight of Ukrainian airspace. With 2 aircraft carriers currently in the Mediterranean, just off the coast of Israel, the US Navy could also contribute to the response with the use of its F-18s. The real question here is the use of air bases in Turkey. Turkey has always been NATO's wild card and has shared uncomfortably close relations with Russia prior to the invasion of Ukraine. Famously, Turkey was kicked out of the F-35 program for purchasing Russian air defense equipment that the US warned could be used by the Russians to gather data on Turkish F-35s. Currently, a few thousand US airmen are stationed at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, along with a complement of American nuclear weapons that make up the US's commitment to defend Turkey from a Russian nuclear attack. The real question would be if Turkey would allow the basing of a US response to Russian nuclear aggression from its soil. Even without Turkey's involvement, though, the US would still be able to make use of its assets across Central Europe and the Mediterranean to carry out a response to a Russian attack. Within hours of confirmation of an attack, an American response could be prepping for retaliation, though it's likely that the US already has a retaliation plan not just in mind, but ready to be immediately implemented given its commitment to deter Russia from further nuclear acts. A coordinated response with Ukraine's armed forces would be likely. While Ukraine can contribute little to long-range striking power, it can offer some help in the task of peeling back Russia's air defense onion. Normally, this would be a task that requires weeks of careful air operations, but thanks to battlefield attrition and the abysmal performance of Russian air defenses, along with new American weapons, a limited strike could likely be carried out despite Russian defenses. What Ukraine could provide is the use of its long-range drone fleet. It's already proven capable of penetrating deep into Russia without being targeted, with Ukrainian drones typically intercepted close to their targets. This means Ukraine likely has mapped out the best approaches through Russian air defenses, which can't be omnipresent across the front and even inside Russia itself. However, these drones, retargeted towards Russian military facilities, would serve the function of eating up Russian interceptors and sowing confusion among Russian air defenses. Peeling the onion, even with Ukrainian aid, would require the use of some of America's latest weapon systems. It's unknown just how capable some of the US's new weapons are, but given the threat to strike against responsible units, even if they are inside of Russian borders, indicates that the US is quite confident in them. Unlike Russia, when the US makes military threats, it's not prone to bullshit. Riding first into battle would likely be American decoys such as the MALD. The ADM-160 MALD, or Miniature Air Launch Decoy, is purpose-built to take on dense air defense networks and can be fired from a variety of American platforms, including B-52s, F-18s, and F-15s, or even A-10s. We know these weapons are effective at penetrating Russian air defenses because we have evidence of their use in Ukraine. In both May and December of 2023, remains of American MALDs were found in the wake of successful Ukrainian strikes utilizing Storm Shadow missiles. These decoys are meant to draw the attention of enemy air defenses, with the unique capability of simulating the radar return of any aircraft in the US arsenal, and presumably outside of it as well. A volley of MALDs could be made to look like an entire squadron of F-15s, for instance, or an attacking flight of B-52 bombers. With an estimated range of 600 miles, a small formation of B-52s could fill the sky with dozens of these decoys from well outside the range of Russian air defense radars. These decoys could then simulate a massive American air attack en route to Russian airspace. After browning their pants, Russian air defense operators would have little choice but to respond. even knowing that the US would use decoys because somewhere amongst them are likely very real strike aircraft. But more advanced MALDs can also launch electronic attacks against enemy air defense networks, affecting their ability to accurately target or confusing their radars. As the tip of the spear, MALDs would not just serve to draw Russian fire, but also sow havoc amongst Russian air defenses, which would inevitably find themselves coming under fire from both American and Ukrainian-launched HARM missiles. Carried by accompanying air superiority aircraft such as the F-15, F-22, and F-35, HARMs would target Russian radars in order to permanently blind them. Even if a radar is shut down, each HARM missile has the ability to remember that radar's location, making evasion highly unlikely. Ukraine has used HARMs even in their limited numbers provided to great effect, and with the added handicap of not being able to utilize the missile's full features due to incompatibility between Western HARMs and Ukraine's Soviet-era aircraft. Any attempt to respond with interceptor aircraft would have to contend with accompanying air defense escorts, in all likelihood a combination of F-22s, F-35s, and F-15s. It's strongly rumored that American F-35s have been flying in the skies of Ukraine since shortly after the war began, just behind the front line and using their sensors to scoop up beams of data on Russian air defenses. This data would be invaluable in conducting aggressive electronic warfare against these same air defenses, through both MALDs equipped for the task and dedicated EW aircraft. F-22s and F-35s would be able to fly much closer to the front and Russian air defenses. Their stealth would also afford them first-shoot capability against Russian air defense jets. Despite their limited payload, F-35s could also run quarterback for F-15s, flying much further back and out of range of Russian defenses, guiding their missiles to the targets for them. An important node in America's air battle network would also likely be the RQ-180 stealth drone. A flying wing design, the drone is so secretive that it remains unacknowledged by the US Air Force. And yet there are strong indications that it has performed surveillance operations near the front lines in multiple conflict zones around the world. It's believed that on top of surveillance, the RQ-180 is also capable of serving as a communications node deep inside of enemy airspace, from where it can relay data to American long-range strike weapons or friendly aircraft. Through the stealth drone, American aircraft could still guide their weapons to targets even when firing them at standoff ranges of hundreds of miles. It's even rumored that the RQ-180 is capable of electronic attack, helping degrade enemy air defenses. Fired from either B-52s, F-18s, B-1 Lancers, B-2s, or even F-16s, the JASSM and LRASM would be the tool of choice to deliver punishment to Russia. The LRASM is a derivative of its land attack cousin, the JASSM, or Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile. With a classified range in excess of 590 miles, JASSM allows even non-stealthy aircraft to punch deep into Russian lines to strike at ground targets. Meanwhile, its anti-ship cousin, the long-range anti-ship missile, can do the same against Black Sea Fleet assets. Both missiles are very low observable platforms with stealthy features. They fly at subsonic speeds, a departure from new Chinese and even Russian anti-ship or air-launched cruise missiles. But they trade speed for survivability, dramatically decreasing the range at which they can be engaged through low observability, thus limiting how much time an enemy has to engage them. Both missiles also feature artificial intelligence to help them pick out their targets in an electronically denied environment, making them fire-and-forget weapons that can pick out military targets from civilian ones with a high degree of accuracy. Given its inability to secure air dominance in Ukraine and extend air superiority over only limited parts of the battlefield, Russia would be unlikely to be able to stop an American response. The strike would require the use of large amounts of US aircraft and possibly even Allied ones, all flying from different bases in Europe or aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean. Yet America's fleet of air tankers could provide the extended range needed for bomb-laden aircraft and top them off for their return flight as far away as Britain. B-2s utilized in the operation could even be flying all the way from the continental United States, with all aircraft's arrival times coordinated for a precise time-on-target attack meant to overwhelm Russian defenses across multiple sections of the front and beyond. The real question would be how Russia would respond to such a humiliating retaliation. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Now go and check out Russia's top nuke targets, or click this other video instead. And don't forget to subscribe to The Military Show for great military content.